The morning was quiet, but filled with movement in the small town where the wedding was to take place. The sun had risen softly over the rooftops, and the streets were already starting to hum with activity. The hotel where the groom was staying was buzzing with excitement and nervous energy. He paced slowly around the suite, looking out the window at the empty street below, wondering if everything was really ready for the day ahead. There was a tension in his chest that he could not shake, a mix of anticipation and unease that had been growing over the last few weeks. The thought of standing in front of everyone and saying vows that would change his life forever made his hands sweat and his heart race. His friends tried to distract him with light conversation and jokes about how nervous he looked, but he barely heard them. His mind kept wandering to the day he first met the bride, the moments that had led to this decision, and the life they were about to begin together. Downstairs, in a sunlit room, filled with flowers and laughter, the bride was getting ready with her closest friends and family. Her dress was spread across the floor in soft folds, and the delicate lace shimmered in the morning light. She moved carefully as someone adjusted the final details, smiling politely, but feeling a flutter of nerves in her stomach. Every moment seemed to stretch and grow heavier as she thought about the ceremony. The small town had been talking about this wedding for weeks, and everyone was expecting perfection. She wanted everything to be just right for herself, for the groom, and for the people who had come to witness the beginning of their life together. The makeup artists and helpers whispered among themselves, offering encouragement and reminding her to breathe. She laughed softly at the gentle chaos around her, but inside her heart was beating fast with excitement and fear. Outside the hotel doors, in the lobby where the guests were beginning to gather, a woman arrived quietly. She did not announce herself, and she moved with care so as not to draw attention. She wore a simple outfit that blended with the crowd, yet there was something in her presence that seemed different. People smiled at her politely as she passed, but none recognized her. She found a quiet corner to stand in and waited. Her eyes were fixed on the groom with a mixture of longing and regret. It was clear that she had a connection to him that was deeper than casual acquaintance. Perhaps in another time or another life, something might have been different. She breathed slowly, steadying herself, and watched as the preparations continued around her. Every movement of the groom drew her attention. Every laugh he shared with his friends felt like a memory that had never fully faded. Back in the suite, the groom had just received the final message from the wedding planner confirming that everything was in place. Tables had been set, the flowers had been arranged, and the music was ready. He nodded to himself, but the reassurance did little to ease the feeling in his stomach. He thought again of the woman who had disappeared from his life so suddenly years ago. He had not seen her since, but he had never forgotten. Her laughter, her voice, and the way she had looked at him in a quiet moment kept returning to him. Even when he tried to push the memories away, he wondered why she had chosen to come today of all days. Perhaps it was a coincidence, or perhaps it was fate reminding him that the past never truly disappears. The bride was now having her veil adjusted. The soft hum of conversation filled the room. She glanced out the window at the empty street below and felt a strange calm wash over her. She tried to focus on the present and the happiness of the day. Every detail mattered to her, and she wanted the memory of this morning to be perfect. Her friends and family flitted around her, making small talk, offering compliments, and trying to keep her calm. She smiled at them and laughed at their little jokes, but there was a quiet space in her heart that she did not share with anyone. A space filled with hope and anticipation, but also with the fear of the unknown. The life she was stepping into was full of promise, but it also carried weight and responsibility. She tried to push the worries away, reminding herself that this was a day to celebrate love and commitment. Meanwhile, in the hotel lobby, the woman remained unnoticed as she moved slowly to a position where she could see the entrance to the suite. She took a deep breath and felt the memories of their past come rushing back. She remembered the days they had spent together, the conversations that lasted late into the night, and the quiet moments when words were not needed to understand one another. She wondered what had changed and why he had chosen someone else, but at the same time she felt a strange sense of inevitability. Some things in life were not meant to be controlled. She adjusted her posture and waited, knowing that the moment she had been dreading or hoping for was about to arrive. The groom finally decided he needed a moment alone to gather his thoughts. He stepped onto the balcony, overlooking the quiet street below, and took a deep breath of the cool morning air. The sunlight warmed his face, and he closed his eyes for a brief moment. He thought of the life he was leaving behind and the life he was about to begin. He reminded himself that he had made the right choice, that the bride was the person he wanted to share his days with. But even as he tried to focus on the present, he could not ignore the feeling that someone from his past was watching, waiting, and holding a piece of his heart that had never truly been returned in another part of the hotel. The bride was having her shoes adjusted and a veil placed carefully on her head. She laughed softly at a joke a friend made and felt the warmth of family around her. The moments stretched like slow music, each one filled with anticipation and hope. She could hear the faint hum of preparations in the background, and she felt the life she had imagined as a child coming closer and closer. There was a mixture of nervousness and excitement in every movement she made. Her heart raced and her hands trembled slightly, but she smiled, reminding herself that this was a day to be remembered forever. The woman in the lobby now stepped closer to the entrance of the suite, her heart pounding in her chest. She could see the groom clearly, and the sight of him brought back a rush of memories she had tried to keep locked away. She felt a strange combination of sadness and longing, realizing that the life she had imagined with him had been replaced by this new reality. The love they had shared in the past was still there, quietly waiting, but the world had moved on without her. She took another deep breath and reminded herself to be patient. The day was just beginning, and the moments ahead would decide how much of the past would intrude on the present. The groom turned back toward the room and felt a moment of clarity. He reminded himself that the bride was the person he had chosen, and that he needed to focus on her happiness. He adjusted his tie and smoothed his jacket, trying to shake the feeling of unease. He told himself that everything would be fine, and that the day would unfold exactly as it should. But even as he spoke these words to himself, he could not ignore the flicker of recognition in the corner of his vision. The feeling that someone was watching him with eyes filled with emotion. The bride now stood fully dressed in her gown, her reflection in the mirror showing a woman ready to take a step into a new chapter of life. She held her bouquet and took a deep breath, feeling the weight and beauty of the moment. Her friends and family surrounded her with encouragement and smiles, yet there was a quiet intensity in her own heart. She wondered what the future would hold, how her life would change after this day, and whether love would always remain as strong and certain as it felt now. The woman in the lobby finally decided to move closer. Walking slowly through the crowd, she remained careful not to draw attention, yet every step carried the weight of years of emotion. She paused just outside the doors to the suite, watching the groom and feeling the tension in her chest grow. The memories of the past seemed to press down on her as though the years had never passed. She realized that the moment she had been anticipating for so long was finally here. She felt both fear and relief. The groom noticed a movement from the corner of his eye and turned slightly. For a brief instant, their eyes met, and the world seemed to stop around them. He felt a jolt of recognition, a shock that sent his heart racing and his mind spinning. Memories of the past flooded back in a rush, overwhelming and vivid. The presence of this woman in a place where she had no reason to be brought as strange, a mix of emotions that he was not prepared to face at this time. He reminded himself of the vows he was about to make, the life he had chosen, and the bride who was waiting for him just down the hall. The bride stood unaware of the silent drama unfolding just a few steps away. She felt a sense of calm wash over her as she adjusted her veil and took another deep breath. The moment felt perfect, like a painting frozen in time. She smiled softly at her reflection, imagining the life that lay ahead and the promises that would be exchanged in just a few hours. The world outside the suite continued its quiet preparation, the hum of guests arriving and the rustle of flowers and dresses filling the air with life. The woman in the lobby watched for another moment before retreating slightly, allowing the groom to gather himself. She knew that her presence alone had caused a ripple in the calm surface of the day. She felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness, understanding that the past could not be fully reclaimed, but that it could not be ignored either. The stage was set for what was to come, and she waited patiently, knowing that the moments ahead would reveal the truth in ways no one could anticipate. The groom returned to his friends and tried to smile. masking the confusion and emotion that churned inside him. He reminded himself that the day was about love and commitment, and that he needed to honor the choice he had made. The bride remained blissfully unaware, her world filled with beauty and hope. The hotel seemed to hold its breath as the morning continued to unfold, each character caught in the delicate tension between past and present, between memory and reality. The final preparations were underway. The flowers were arranged, the music was tuned, and the guests began to arrive. The day was moving forward toward a ceremony that would be remembered not only for its beauty, but for the quiet undercurrents of emotion that no one could yet see. The groom felt the weight of decisions he had made. The bride held her dreams tightly in her heart, and the woman from the past watched from the shadows, carrying memories and longing that would shape the events of the day. The morning slowly gave way to midday. The sunlight poured through the windows, casting a golden glow over the hotel suite. The bride took one last look in the mirror and adjusted her dress, feeling ready to step into the life she had imagined. The groom checked his reflection, straightened his tie, and took a deep breath, preparing to face the promises and challenges that awaited him. The woman lingered nearby, a silent witness to the unfolding story, knowing that the day ahead would test emotions in ways no one could yet predict. Every detail had been considered, and yet the future remained uncertain. The stage was set for love and celebration, but also for conflict and revelation. The quiet anticipation of the morning held the promise of joy and the possibility of heartbreak. The first part of the day was over, and the story was only beginning to unfold, carrying with it the weight of past choices and the fragile hope of new beginnings. The ceremony hall was quiet at first, with sunlight streaming through the tall windows and dust motes dancing in the air. The chairs had been set in neat rows, the aisle lined with soft flowers that created a delicate path toward the front. Everything looked perfect, carefully arranged to celebrate love and union. But beneath the surface, tension began to stir. The groom stood in the back of the hall adjusting his jacket and checking his tie one last time. He could hear the faint murmur of guests arriving and the soft sound of footsteps on the wooden floor. His mind, however, was not on the decorations or the music. It kept wandering back to the woman who had appeared earlier. He remembered the way she had looked at him, a mix of longing and something unspoken, a feeling that reached deep into his chest. He had tried to shake it off, telling himself that the day was about him and the bride, and that the past should not matter anymore. But even as he tried to focus, the image of her standing quietly in the corner of the hotel lobby would not leave his mind. Every word he had spoken to reassure himself seemed hollow. Every breath felt heavy with memories he thought he had buried. Meanwhile, the bride was in another room with her closest friends. She held the bouquet in her hands and ran her fingers over the petals. The soft fragrance calmed her, and she smiled as she thought about the groom waiting for her. The room was filled with laughter and chatter, but she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was the culmination of years of dreams and hopes. She wanted everything to be perfect, not only for herself, but for the people who had gathered to witness this day. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the straps of her dress, and she could feel the nervous excitement building inside her. The mysterious woman moved slowly through the hotel, careful not to be noticed by anyone except the groom. She had waited quietly in the lobby, and now she found herself near the entrance to the ceremony hall. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and her hands felt clammy. She wanted to speak with him, to remind him of what they had shared, but she also feared the consequences. She knew that one wrong word could destroy everything the bride had dreamed of. Still, she could not ignore the pull of her own emotions. The years they had been apart had left space between them, but the bond had never fully disappeared. She took a deep breath and stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the groom as he moved down the aisle to check something near the back. The groom noticed her movement out of the corner of his eye and froze for a moment. He could not believe she was here. He wanted to turn and speak, but the hall was filling quickly with guests, and he did not want to cause a scene. He tried to calm himself, repeating that this day was about love and commitment, that the bride was waiting for him, and that he had made the choice to marry her. But every word felt fragile against the flood of memories and the sudden presence of someone from his past. He could feel a knot forming in his stomach and his hands shook slightly as he straightened his jacket and forced himself to move forward. The bride now took a deep breath and began walking toward the hall. Her dress swept softly against the floor, and her friends flanked her on either side, offering gentle encouragement. She felt a thrill of excitement mixed with nervousness. She imagined the moment she would see the groom standing at the front and the look on his face. When he saw her for the first time that day, her heart raced as she approached the doors, each step bringing her closer to the life she had imagined. She did not notice the subtle tension in the air, the way the groom's gaze had flickered toward the corner, or the way someone from his past was quietly watching him with emotions too deep to hide. The hall was filling with guests, who murmured politely to one another and took their seats. The soft hum of conversation created a warm atmosphere. But the undercurrent of tension was almost invisible to everyone except the groom. He tried to focus on his breathing, to steady his hands and calm the racing of his heart. He thought of the bride and the promises he was about to make. But the memory of the woman who had appeared unexpectedly kept returning. He could see her clearly now as she moved slightly closer, and the years of emotion that had been tucked away came rushing back with an intensity he had not anticipated. As the bride reached the end of the aisle, she paused to straighten her dress and took another deep breath. The sunlight caught the folds of her gown and made it shimmer softly. She looked toward the front where the groom would soon stand and felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She thought about the life ahead, the promises they would make, and the people who had gathered to celebrate with them. She did not notice the subtle shift in the groom's expression or the way his eyes flicked toward the side, toward the person who had once been so important to him. The groom stepped closer to the front of the hall and felt the presence of the woman near the entrance. He could no longer ignore it. Every instinct told him to turn and acknowledge her, but he also knew that doing so could change everything. He felt the weight of the moment pressing on him, the realization that the past and present were colliding in a way he had not expected. He reminded himself that the bride was waiting, that this day was about her as much as it was about him, and that he had made the choice to spend his life with her. Yet even as he thought these things, he could not deny the flicker of old feelings that stirred deep inside. The woman took a cautious step forward, and her voice barely rose above a whisper when she spoke to him. She said words that carried the weight of years, words that made him freeze and catch his breath. She reminded him of the past they had shared, the memories that had been left unresolved, and the emotions that had never truly gone away. The groom felt a wave of guilt and confusion wash over him. He wanted to respond, but could not find the words. The hall was filling with people, and every moment of hesitation felt heavier than the last. The bride began walking slowly down the aisle. Her friends followed closely behind, adjusting her dress and whispering encouragement. She could feel the eyes of the guests on her, and the warmth of their attention made her heart flutter. She smiled softly and imagined the groom at the end of the aisle, waiting with a calm and reassuring expression. She did not notice the subtle tension building behind the scenes, the quiet confrontation that had already begun in the shadows. The woman remained where she was, watching every movement and knowing the moments ahead could alter the course of the day. The groom struggled with his feelings as he watched the bride approach. His heart told him to stay focused on her, to push aside the emotions from the past. But the words he had just heard from the woman lingered, making it impossible to ignore what had been stirred. He felt torn between the choice he had made and the memories that had never truly faded. Every step the bride took toward him seemed to heighten the inner conflict, making his hands shake and his chest tighten. He reminded himself again that he had made a promise. He had chosen a life with the bride, and that the past could not define the present. The woman stepped closer, moving silently and carefully, so as not to be seen by anyone else. She felt the weight of the moment pressing on her, the realization that her presence could disrupt a day that was meant to celebrate love and happiness. She wondered if she should speak again, to make him truly see her, to remind him of everything they had shared. At the same time, she feared the consequences, the possibility of causing pain that could not be undone. She paused for a breath and let herself observe, knowing that her emotions were as fragile and powerful as the moments unfolding before her. The bride now reached the front of the aisle, looked toward the groom. Her heart raced, and her smile was gentle, but full of anticipation. She took his hand and felt a warmth that made her heart swell. For a moment the world seemed perfect, full of light and hope. She imagined the life they would build together, the moments they would share, and the love that would grow between them. The groom held her hand, but could not fully release the tension that had gripped him since the morning began. He smiled at her, trying to focus on her happiness. But inside, he wrestled with the emotions that had resurfaced so suddenly. The guests settled into their seats, unaware of the quiet drama unfolding at the edges of the hall. The woman watched the groom and the bride, feeling a mixture of sadness and longing. She knew that the moment was fleeting, and that the choices made in the next few minutes could shape the future in ways that no one could predict. She felt the weight of years pressing on her heart, and the bittersweet taste of memories that could not be reclaimed. Yet she stayed silent, letting the moment pass slowly. Savoring the tension and the raw emotion that filled the room, the groom whispered softly to the bride, words of reassurance and love that he hoped would calm her nerves. She smiled and squeezed his hand, feeling the connection between them and the promise of the life they were about to begin. Yet even as they shared this quiet intimacy, the presence of the past lingered nearby. A reminder that life was never simple, and that emotions were never entirely under control. The woman remained at the edge, silent but present. Holding the echoes of what had been and what could never be again, the ceremony began. Soft music filling the hall and gentle light streaming through the windows. Every guest felt the warmth and the beauty of the moment, the promise of love and commitment. The bride and groom exchanged glances, their hands held tightly together, and the air was thick with emotion. But beneath the calm surface, tensions simmered. The groom's mind wandered occasionally to the woman he had seen earlier, the memories of the past tugging at him in ways he could not ignore. The bride, unaware of the subtle storm, felt only the joy of the day and the love she believed was steady and unshakable. The hall seemed to hold its breath as the moments continued to unfold. The woman watched silently, the weight of her presence pressing lightly against the edges of the scene. She knew that the day was reaching a delicate balance between joy and disruption, between past and present, and that every step forward carried the possibility of revelation. The groom tried to focus on the bride, on the life they were about to begin, but he could not escape the pull of the past. The memory of what had been, and what could never fully disappear. The music began to play softly in the hall as the bride and groom stood at the front, hands still clasped together. The guests watched quietly, sensing the specialness of the moment, unaware of the quiet tension that had been building since morning. Everything looked perfect from the outside. The flowers, the lights, and the gentle sunlight streaming through the windows. But beneath the calm, emotions were on the edge of spilling over. The groom felt a tightness in his chest he could not ignore. Every smile he gave to the bride carried a weight, a reminder of the presence that lingered nearby. He tried to focus on the life he was choosing, on the happiness of the day. But his mind kept drifting to the woman he had seen earlier, the one whose arrival had stirred old feelings he thought he had left behind. The bride smiled softly at the groom, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers. She imagined the life ahead, the promises they would exchange, and the happiness they would share. She did not notice the subtle flicker of unease in his eyes, or the way he shifted slightly, as if trying to steady himself. Her heart was full of hope, full of the belief that love was simple and steady, and that the day was unfolding exactly as it should. She adjusted her dress and took a deep breath, thinking only of the man standing in front of her and the life they would build together. The woman from the past moved quietly along the edges of the hall, careful not to draw attention to herself. She watched the groom closely, noticing every flicker of emotion, every hesitation in his movement. She felt a mixture of longing and sadness as she remembered the life they had once imagined together. She wondered if she should speak, if she should remind him of what had been left unfinished between them. But she also feared the consequences. Every guest in the hall was unaware of her presence, and yet she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She knew that in the next minutes, everything could change, that the balance between past and present was fragile and delicate. As the ceremony continued, the groom's thoughts became harder to control. He tried to focus on the bride, on the words they would exchange, and on the life he had chosen. But his gaze kept flicking to the woman at the edge of the room. He could see the longing in her eyes, the memories and emotions that had never been resolved. His chest tightened and he felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He reminded himself that he had made a choice and that he needed to honor it. He had promised to love and care for the bride, and he wanted to keep that promise. But the sudden confrontation with the past made it difficult to maintain calm. The bride noticed a small hesitation in his smile, a fleeting shadow that passed across his expression. She assumed it was just nerves, the natural anxiety of a big moment, and she squeezed his hand gently, giving him silent reassurance. Her trust in him was strong, her belief in their love unshakable, and she allowed herself to be carried forward by hope and the beauty of the day. She stepped a little closer to him, feeling the connection between them and the life they were about to create. She imagined the joy of the moment being shared with all the people who had come to celebrate. The warmth and love of their support surrounding them like a soft embrace. The woman finally moved closer to the front, presence now harder to ignore. The groom felt a jolt in his chest as he saw her clearly for the first time since she had arrived. She did not speak at first, simply watching him with an intensity that made him feel exposed. Memories from years ago came rushing back in a sudden wave, overwhelming him with emotions he had thought were long gone. He felt torn between the life he had chosen and the life he had imagined with her, between the promise he was making and the emotions that refused to fade. He wanted to turn and acknowledge her, to speak and explain, but he could not. The hall was filled with guests, and the moment was too fragile to risk disrupting it. Yet the pull of the past was too strong to ignore. The bride began to notice something was different. She felt a shift in the energy around her, a subtle change that made her pause for a moment. She looked toward the guests and saw a few heads turn slightly toward the edge of the hall, curious or concerned. Her eyes followed the direction of the gaze and landed on the figure of the woman standing at the side. She did not recognize her, but there was a strange intensity in her presence that made the bride feel a flutter of unease. She tightened her grip on the groom's hand, still smiling softly, but her mind began to race with questions she could not yet answer. The woman spoke, her voice soft but clear, carrying across the hall in a way that made everyone pause. She said words that were meant only for the groom, a reminder of the connection they had shared and the emotions that had never fully disappeared. The groom froze, caught off guard by the sudden intrusion. His heart raced, and he felt a wave of panic as the quiet, controlled moment of the ceremony was disrupted. The words hung in the air between them, a quiet accusation and a plea at the same time. He wanted to respond but could not find the words, and the guests looked around in confusion. Sensing that something was different but not understanding what had happened, the bride felt a sudden tension, a ripple of unease that passed through her. She looked up at the groom and saw the shadow in his eyes, the hesitation that had been building since the morning. She followed his gaze and finally noticed the woman at the edge of the hall. Questions flooded her mind, feelings of uncertainty and fear mingling with the excitement of the day. She tried to smile, to steady herself, but inside she felt a sudden and unfamiliar churn of emotion. The world she had imagined as perfect seemed to wobble slightly, revealing cracks she had not anticipated. The groom took a deep breath and tried to focus, reminding himself that he was standing on the threshold of a new life. He wanted to reassure the bride, to continue with the promises they had planned to exchange, but the presence of the woman kept pulling at him, reminding him of choices made and paths not taken. He felt a mix of guilt, longing, and fear as he faced the unexpected intrusion of the past. He looked at the bride and saw her trust and love, her hope and belief in him, and he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. The woman moved a step closer, and her words became slightly louder, still meant for the groom but impossible to ignore. The guests shifted in their seats, sensing the tension and confusion that had entered the room. Whispers began to circulate quietly as people tried to make sense of what was happening. The groom's chest tightened further as he struggled to balance the emotions from the past with the life he had chosen. He wanted to turn and explain to calm the situation, but he knew that doing so could make everything worse. He looked at the bride, at the hope in her eyes, and forced himself to remain still. Even as the storm of feelings raged inside him, the bride felt her heart begin to race. She could sense that something important was happening, but she did not yet understand the full scope. Her trust in the groom made her want to continue forward, to hold on to the happiness of the moment. But a part of her could not ignore the tension building around them. She looked at the guests, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and concern, and realized that the day she had imagined as perfect was now complicated in ways she had never expected. She took a deep breath and held the groom's hand tighter, trying to find calm in the midst of confusion. The groom closed his eyes for a brief moment, trying to steady himself. He thought of the life he was choosing, the promises he was about to make, and the love that had brought him to this day. He reminded himself that the past could not control the present, that the decisions he had made were based on careful thought and a desire to build a future with the bride. He opened his eyes and saw the woman looking at him with an intensity that made his heart ache. Her presence was a challenge, a reminder of the unfinished story they had shared, and yet he knew he had to remain committed to the life he had chosen. The woman stepped closer and spoke again, her words carrying an emotion that made the groom flinch. She reminded him of moments they had shared, of promises made and dreams imagined together. He felt a wave of guilt for the pain she might feel, for the disruption she had caused, and for the conflict within himself. He wanted to comfort her, to explain, to make things right, but he knew that this was not possible in the midst of the ceremony. He looked at the bride and felt the weight of the choice he had made, the responsibility of the vows he was about to take, and the love he had for the woman beside him. The bride took a step forward, her eyes searching the groom's face for understanding. She saw the tension, the hesitation, and the pull of emotions that were difficult to control. She felt a mixture of fear and determination, realizing that she needed to stay strong for the moment and for the life they were about to begin. She adjusted her dress and held her head high, determined to continue despite the shadow of uncertainty. She felt the warmth of the groom's hand and allowed herself to focus on their connection, the life they had chosen to share, and the love that had brought them together. The guests continued to murmur quietly, sensing the tension in the air. Some glanced around, wondering what had caused the shift in energy, while others simply waited in curiosity, unaware of the full story unfolding in front of them. The groom took a deep breath and tried to push aside the emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. He focused on the bride, on the promises he was about to make, and on the life they would build together. The woman remained at the edge of the hall, watching and waiting, her heart heavy with longing and regret, understanding that the moments ahead would shape the course of the day in ways that could not be reversed. The hall had quieted down, though the air still carried tension and the weight of what had just happened. Guests whispered in small groups, some exchanging glances that spoke of confusion, curiosity, and quiet concern. The groom stood to the side, his chest heavy with emotion. The words that had been spoken by the woman earlier kept replaying in his mind, each repetition tightening the knot of guilt and regret that had formed there. He wanted to speak, to explain, to make the situation make sense, but the moment had passed, and now every action felt loaded with consequence. He looked at the bride and saw the hurt and uncertainty in her eyes. Her smile, once bright and unshakable, was now faltering, like a candle struggling against the wind. The bride felt the air around her press down, the joy she had carried since morning feeling fragile and distant. She tried to remind herself of the life they had chosen, of the love that had brought them to this day. But the sudden intrusion of the past had thrown her world into unexpected turbulence. She could feel the warmth of the groom's hand, but it was not enough to chase away the questions forming in her mind. She wondered about the woman, the memories she must carry, as a part of the groom that had belonged to someone else before her. Even in the midst of celebration, the heart has a way of noticing cracks. The woman who had caused the disruption stood a little away from the crowd, her arms wrapped lightly around herself, a mixture of relief and sorrow in her chest. She had spoken. She had reminded him of what had been, and she had done so without intending to hurt anyone. Yet she could not deny the effects of her presence. She had known the risk and had taken it anyway, propelled by years of unresolved feelings. She watched the bride and groom together, feeling a mixture of admiration and envy, understanding that the life she had imagined with him was no longer hers to claim. She realized that her actions had changed the course of the day and that she would have to carry the consequences with quiet acceptance. Groom stepped away from the front of the hall and found a quiet corner to stand alone. He ran his hands over his face, trying to steady the storm of thoughts inside him. The words of the woman replayed in his mind, reminding him of the connection they had once shared, the time and trust and laughter that had once been his world. He felt guilt for what had been left unsaid, for the life that might have been, and for the hurt that had been caused in this moment of exposure. Yet he also felt a fierce need to hold on to the life he had chosen, to honor the commitment he had made, and to try to soothe the turmoil around him. The bride retreated to a quiet space just beyond the hall, seeking the comfort of a few trusted friends. She felt the weight of the morning settle onto her shoulders, her heart still racing from the shock of the confrontation. She thought about the groom, about the bond they shared, and about the fragility of trust when faced with reminders of the past. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, to close her eyes, and to consider her feelings. The questions came fast and unrelenting. Could she forgive the disruption? Could she trust the groom fully? Could love survive this unexpected storm she tried to answer? But her mind was clouded with uncertainty and her heart with unease. The woman stood near the edge of the hall, observing without intruding, feeling the gravity of what had transpired. She realized that she had been both a catalyst and a witness, and that her presence had shifted emotions and revealed truths that could not be undone. She thought about the groom, the bond they had shared, and the life that had passed between them. She felt sadness, longing, and acceptance in equal measure. Some part of her wanted to speak again, to offer clarity or comfort, but she understood that the moment for words had passed. She could only observe and let time carry the consequences of her actions. Guests moved through the hall quietly, some approaching the bride to offer smiles and gentle words of reassurance. They could sense that something had happened, though they did not know the full story. People were naturally drawn to moments of tension, and yet they offered support in their own quiet way. The bride felt the warmth of their attention and the kindness of their presence, yet she could not fully let go of the uncertainty that pressed against her heart. She thought of the groom and the woman, of the emotions that had collided, and of the choices that now lay before her. The groom found a chair near the side of the hall and sat down, his hands folded in his lap. He closed his eyes briefly, trying to untangle the emotions inside him. The sense of responsibility weighed heavily, and the knowledge that his past had intruded on the present made every thought more difficult. He remembered moments with the woman from years ago, moments filled with laughter and trust and intimacy that had been suddenly cut short. He also thought of the bride, of her hopes, and her belief in him, and felt a deep desire to honor the life they had chosen together. His heart was torn between past and present, between memory and commitment, and the struggle left him feeling raw and vulnerable. The bride moved closer to the groom, sitting quietly beside him. She did not speak at first, allowing the silence to stretch between them. Her presence was gentle and steady, a reminder that the life they had chosen was still real and valuable. She could feel the tension in him, the storm of emotions that had been unleashed, and she wanted to offer comfort. She reached for his hand, letting him know without words that she was there. He took it gratefully, squeezing gently, and for a moment the world outside seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet intimacy of shared connection. The woman observed the two of them. Feeling the ache of longing and the quiet satisfaction of closure, she had reminded him of the past, had brought buried emotions to the surface, and had watched as the present unfolded in response. She felt sadness for what could not be reclaimed, but also a strange peace knowing that she had acted honestly with her own emotions. She stepped back slightly, allowing herself to become a quiet witness to the unfolding resolution, understanding that the moments of the day would leave lasting impressions for everyone involved. Time seemed to slow as the bride and groom sat together in silence, absorbing the intensity of the morning. The groom finally spoke, his voice low and steady, explaining his feelings and acknowledging the presence of the woman from his past. He shared the complexity of his emotions, the memories that had resurfaced, and the love he felt for the bride. His words were honest and raw, filled with vulnerability that made the bride hold his hand tighter. She listened, feeling the weight of truth in what he said, and allowed herself to forgive and understand even as she processed the shock. The bride responded quietly, sharing her own feelings and fears. She spoke of trust, of the expectations she had held, and of the challenge of accepting the intrusion of the past into what was meant to be a perfect day. Her words were measured but full of emotion, reflecting the depth of her heart and the complexity of human relationships. She expressed the desire to move forward together, to honor the life they had chosen, and to acknowledge that love was not always simple or easy. The groom listened intently, his chest tightening with gratitude and relief. Knowing that this conversation was an important step toward healing, the woman remained at the edge, her heart full of mixed emotions. She felt relief that the confrontation had been honest and direct, sadness for the loss of what might have been, and a quiet sense of acceptance that her role was limited to being a catalyst for truth. She realized that the lives of the bride and groom were unfolding in ways that were beyond her control, and that her emotions, though powerful, could not alter the choices they had made. She allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Letting the intensity of the day settle into memory, guests began to move quietly around the hall, offering gentle words of encouragement and support to the bride and groom. The atmosphere, though still charged, softened slightly as people sensed that the immediate tension had eased. The bride and groom stood together, holding hands and facing the quiet understanding of the moment. They knew that the day would continue, that the celebration would go on, and that the lives they were building would be strengthened by honesty and openness. Yet they also recognized that emotions are delicate, and that the events of the morning would leave lasting impressions on their hearts. The groom took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility and love pressing down in equal measure. He looked at the bride and saw the resilience in her eyes, the strength of her heart, and the unwavering trust she had chosen to place in him. He felt gratitude for her presence, relief that their connection had weathered the storm, and a renewed determination to honor the life they were creating together. The bride smiled softly, her own emotions a mixture of relief and understanding, knowing that love requires patience, forgiveness, and courage. The woman turned slowly and walked toward the exit, feeling the quiet ache of longing and the relief of closure. She knew that her presence had been necessary, that her actions had revealed truths that could not be ignored, and that her part in the story was complete. She felt sadness for what could not be reclaimed, but also a sense of peace in knowing that she had acted honestly with her emotions. As she left, the bride and groom watched silently, understanding that life is filled with moments of challenge, revelation, and growth. The hall slowly returned to its rhythm, the music soft and gentle, the guests moving with a mixture of curiosity and care. The bride and groom held each other closely, drawing strength from their shared connection and the understanding that love is both fragile and resilient. They knew that the events of the morning would be remembered, that emotions had been tested, and that the choices they had made were strengthened by honesty. The presence of the past had challenged them, but it had also illuminated the depth of their commitment and the strength of their hearts. The day had grown longer, and the sun was slowly beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting a warm glow across the hall and the gardens beyond. The guests had returned to their seats, some still murmuring quietly about the events of the morning, but most had begun to relax into the celebration. Music played softly, and the subtle hum of conversation filled the space once more. The groom stood near the front, his hand in the bride's, feeling a sense of quiet determination. The tension from the earlier confrontation had not completely faded, but it had transformed into something softer, something that could be understood and accepted. He looked at the bride and saw the calm in her eyes, the gentle strength that had allowed them to survive the shock of the past. Intruding on the present, the bride took a deep breath and smiled faintly. Feeling the warmth of the groom's hand and the steady presence beside her, she realized that the events of the morning had changed something. They had not destroyed the foundation of love that she felt. Instead, they had revealed the depth of emotions, the complexities of human connection, and the courage it takes to move forward despite uncertainty. She allowed herself a moment to reflect on her own feelings, the trust she had placed in the groom, and the hope she carried for the life they were about to build together. Her heart was cautious but open, ready to continue the journey that had begun so many years before in quieter ways. The woman from the past had left quietly. Slipping away before the reception could fully resume, she walked slowly through the streets of the small town. Feeling the cool evening air on her skin and the weight of the day pressing gently on her shoulders, there was sadness, yes, but also relief, a sense that she had done what needed to be done. She had reminded him of the life they had shared and allowed the truth of their emotions to surface. But she had also stepped aside, letting the present reclaim its place. She understood that love is not always about possession or timing, but about honesty and acceptance. As she moved forward, she felt a strange mixture of closure and longing, knowing that her part in this story was complete yet, that the echoes of her presence would linger in quiet ways for both of them. The groom turned to the bride. Feeling the weight of the morning's events settling into a softer rhythm, he took her hands in his and spoke quietly, his voice calm and measured, telling her that he wanted to honor her, to love her, and to move forward with clarity and openness. He acknowledged the presence of the past, the emotions that had surfaced, and the complexity of human relationships. But he also expressed the certainty he felt in the life they had chosen together. The bride listened, feeling the sincerity in his words and the depth of his commitment. She allowed herself to accept the honesty, to forgive the intrusion of the past, and to embrace the path they would walk together. The guests watched as the bride and groom exchanged quiet smiles and gentle glances. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a sense of relief and understanding that replaced the tension from earlier. People sensed that the couple had weathered the storm and were emerging with a stronger bond. Their love tempered by the truth of human emotion. Conversations resumed in quieter tones, laughter returned softly, and the celebration began to regain its rhythm. The music grew slightly louder, and the warm golden light filled the hall with a sense of calm and renewal. The bride and groom moved through the reception together, greeting guests and sharing smiles. Though their hands remained tightly intertwined, they carried with them the memory of the confrontation and the lessons it had brought, understanding that love is never without challenges. The groom felt a renewed sense of responsibility, knowing that trust is fragile and must be nurtured carefully. The bride felt the strength of forgiveness and patience, realizing that love requires courage and the willingness to confront difficult truths. Together, they navigated the remaining moments of the day with grace, finding joy in small gestures, in quiet exchanges, and in the presence of those who had come to support them. Later, as the evening grew darker and the first stars appeared in the sky, the couple found a quiet moment alone in the garden outside the hall. The air was cool and still, filled with the gentle fragrance of flowers and the soft murmur of conversation from inside. They stood together, hands still joined, and allowed themselves to reflect on the day, the emotions that had arisen, and the choices they had made. The groom spoke again, this time more freely, admitting his fears and regrets, acknowledging the pull of the past and the clarity of the present. The bride listened, her own heart open and understanding, offering reassurance without judgment. The quiet intimacy of the moment allowed them both to breathe fully, to feel grounded, and to embrace the life they had chosen together. The woman from the past had found a small park nearby, where the benches overlooked the trees and the quiet streetlights began to glow. She sat and let herself think, reflecting on the emotions that had driven her to appear, on the love she had once known, and on the acceptance she now felt. She understood that her presence had been a catalyst, a necessary moment of honesty, but that the life she had imagined with him was no longer hers to claim. She allowed herself to feel the sadness and the release simultaneously, understanding that human emotions are complex and layered, and that closure often comes not with dramatic gestures, but with quiet acceptance. Inside the hall, the reception continued with gentle laughter, dancing, and soft music. Guests began to share stories, offer kind words, and join in the celebrations, creating a warm and supportive atmosphere. The bride and groom moved among them, holding hands, sharing smiles, and savoring the moments of happiness. They knew that the events of the day would remain in their memories. a reminder of the strength of love and the courage required to confront emotions honestly. Every interaction, every conversation, was imbued with the awareness that relationships are fragile and precious, and that trust and commitment are earned and maintained with care. As the night grew deeper, the couple found themselves alone again, standing on a balcony overlooking the town. The lights from the buildings below twinkled like stars of their own, and the gentle breeze carried the sounds of the celebration softly to them. They spoke quietly about the future, about the life they wanted to build, and about the love that had survived the challenges of the day. They made silent promises to each other, not only in words, but in the strength of their gaze and the warmth of their hands. The storm of the morning had passed, leaving behind a clearer understanding of each other and of the fragility and resilience of human emotion. The woman from the past had returned home by now. Walking slowly through the quiet streets, she thought of the groom, of the bride, and of the lives that were continuing forward without her presence. There was no anger or bitterness, only a deep sense of understanding and acceptance. She realized that love is not always about being present at every moment, but about honesty, clarity, and letting go when necessary. She understood that her role had been important, that the emotions she had stirred had prompted reflection, healing, and a deeper connection for both of them. As she reached her doorstep, she took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace she had not known before, knowing that the past could remain a memory without dictating the present. Back in the hall, the bride and groom shared a quiet dance together. The music was soft, the world around them fading slightly, leaving only the intimacy of their connection. They moved carefully, step by step, as though feeling the weight and value of the trust between them. Each movement was deliberate, gentle, and filled with the understanding that love is fragile, that life is unpredictable, and that happiness must be nurtured with care and patience. The groom felt relief and gratitude. The bride felt strength and warmth. And together they let the moments carry them toward the future they had chosen. Later, they stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars above seemed brighter now, each one a reminder that life continues, that hope endures, and that love is capable of growth even after trials. They walked slowly through the quiet streets of the town, their hands intertwined, their hearts aligned. They spoke softly, sharing reflections on the day, on their feelings, and on the journey they were beginning. The challenges they had faced had not broken them. Instead, it created an understanding that would guide them through the years to come. The woman from the past watched the lights of the hall from a distance, a quiet smile on her face. She understood that the day had unfolded as it needed to. Love had been tested and had endured, and that her part was to let go. She felt a mixture of melancholy and relief, knowing that her actions had created moments of honesty and growth, but also that the life she had imagined with him was no longer her own. She turned and walked into the quiet streets, carrying with her the lessons of love, closure, and acceptance. The bride and groom returned to the hall, briefly to thank their guests and share final moments of laughter and joy. The music continued softly, conversations flowed, and the celebration resumed a gentle rhythm. They moved among the people they cared about, acknowledging the support, warmth, and kindness that had surrounded them throughout the day. Every smile and every gesture carried the understanding that life is filled with moments of unpredictability, that human emotion is complex, that love is strengthened not by perfection but by honesty and courage. As the night came to a close, the bride and groom stood together in the quiet of the hall. They looked at each other, their hands still joined, and felt the weight of the day, the challenges they had faced, and the love that had carried them through. They understood that life would continue to bring moments of uncertainty and emotion, but that together they could navigate whatever came their way. The presence of the past had reminded them of vulnerability and trust, of honesty and patience, and they embraced the promise of the future. With hearts aligned and spirits calm, the woman from the past finally found a quiet place to rest, allowing the events of the day to settle within her. She reflected on the emotions, the choices, and the lessons learned. She understood that love is not always about possession, that closure is found in honesty, and that the lives of others can continue even as her own journey moves forward. She allowed herself to feel peace, gratitude, and acceptance, knowing that the story she had influenced would continue without her presence, but with the lessons her actions had imparted. The bride and groom stepped outside one last time. Breathing the cool night air together, they felt the calm of completion, the quiet strength of their bond, and the understanding that love, though tested, had endured. The stars above seemed to shine with gentle approval, and the town lay quiet beneath their feet. They walked slowly into the future, hand in hand, hearts full, and spirits ready for the life they had chosen, carrying with them the lessons of the day, the resilience of human emotion, and the enduring power of trust and love.